So we have a number of cultural traits within income and engagement, and one of them is win or lose, learn. So every time we win a pitch, every time we win a grant, every time we have a great meeting, and every time we lose, and we've had some big ones this year, which are hard to recover from, you learn why and what were the success factors. And even when you lose, you did some great work in there, and let's not throw it all away. You're building relationships with supporters all the time and getting to know them and being curious. And I think probably that takes discipline to spend time on that when you may not be directly working up to an ask, but it ultimately pays off over time. I think they're looking for joy and fulfillment when you give to an organisation, whether that's leaving as a legacy or choosing as their partner or giving as a major gift. They want to feel like that has been the right choice and that they get a great sense of fulfillment out of it. So I think we take that really seriously.
Welcome back to the Fundraising Bright Spots podcast. My name's Rob Woods, and this is the show for fundraisers who want ideas and perhaps a little dose of inspiration to help you raise more money and really enjoy your job. This is episode 173. Now, if you're the leader of a fundraising team or you work in high value fundraising, this one's for you. Because this time we're looking at the culture, priorities and behaviours that help you achieve ongoing growth in high value fundraising. I recently sat down with a brilliant fundraiser and experienced leader named Charlotte Mathieu, who heads up the high value fundraising team at the Alzheimer Society, which is a relatively large charity in the UK. In recent years, her department has been achieving impressive growth, and I was keen to find out from Charlotte the things that she and her colleagues have been prioritising, and which she feels have helped to achieve this valuable growth. I found Charlotte's examples and her ways of thinking about culture hugely helpful, and I think you're going to enjoy it too. Hello Charlotte, welcome to the podcast.
Hi Rob, thanks so much for having me.
You're welcome. I've been looking forward to this chat ever since we spoke the other day, and I was so impressed by the things I've been noticing about growth and wonderful results that your charity has been achieving. And in particular, I happen to have noticed in terms of the high value fundraising team have been getting certain wonderful results. But I'm getting ahead of myself. What is your role at the charity?
I'm the Associate Director of High Value and Legacies.
And it's a pretty large team, larger probably in terms of headcount than in many of the charities that listen to our show. But I think the principles remain the same. You had worked for Alzheimer's Society before, you went elsewhere, and then recently you came back. And at the time when you came back, you and your colleagues had a think about why you wanted to create a certain kind of way of working.
Absolutely. I was here. I had 5 great years working in the philanthropy team and with the high value teams here. Then I went to another amazing charity, but actually returned back to Alzheimer's Society exactly 2 years ago, actually. And the teams were doing some really great work, and we'd had some really good wins and some great opportunities in philanthropy, but it felt quite inconsistent. And I think we sort of sat down as a leadership team and thought about this sense that we were having to start from scratch every time, and we weren't able to really apply our learnings. So we looked at kind of what are all the challenges, tried to get to the root cause of the things that were causing various different issues. And we came up with 3 key strategic pillars, which have really been our kind of North Star and our guidance for trying to raise the quality and the consistency of our work across all of our teams. And they are having firm foundations, making sure we deliver exceptional experiences, and maximising value both for the donor but also for the organisation.
Thank you. I think when you look at your bottom line for the teams in your department, there is growth. Roughly what level of growth has been achieved in the last 2 years?
Across corporate and philanthropy, we've seen about 30% growth over the last couple of years. But if you take the last 5 years for our philanthropy team in particular, they've delivered 150% growth. So that has been driven by some really great opportunities, and I'm sure we'll get onto it, but some of the brilliant work of relationship fundraising, like really understanding who our donors are and what they want. But it was, I think, when we sat down together as a team to think about how we were going to focus the team and build a really strong strategy, we still saw, even though we'd had these opportunities, they felt exceptional. They didn't feel like we had systematized them. And my boss always says to me, build the machine. You can't just expect to do all these great things and start from scratch each time. You need to understand what the infrastructure needs to be so that each time you're taking a step change, that's your new bottom level. You're not going back to zero each time. And I think that was our real focus, particularly of firm foundations. How do we make sure that every time we win, we understand why, and that becomes the new norm and the new basis from which to grow again? So we have a number of cultural traits within income and engagement. And one of them is win or lose, learn. So every time we win a pitch, every time we win a grant, every time we have a great meeting, and every time we lose, and we've had some big ones this year, which are hard to recover from, you learn why and what were the success factors. And even when you lose, you did some great work in there, and let's not throw it all away, but let's understand it and really drive that into next time. We went through the wash up this morning, and the question is, why was it so successful, and how can we replicate that again?
Yeah. And I wonder if you can think of an example of something you're now doing well, or a certain success recently that at some level did only happen because a lesson that was learned in the past.
I think a really great example is probably one of our most exciting and most proud moments. We won the PPL Dream Fund last year. And we'd gone for it before, hadn't been able to get together the right kind of pitch, hadn't had the right approach. And I mean, winning that was an exceptional piece of work by a number of people, and particularly from the fundraisers who lead that relationship, because we won it for research, which isn't actually what PPL generally funds. So it was really extraordinary. But what we had ploughed into that process that we'd learned from previous ones is that we didn't really understand what they were looking for. We didn't really understand the donor. We didn't have a strong enough relationship to really test ideas and be able to influence them. So when we came to the PPL Dream Fund process, we were able to apply all of that, and we were in a much stronger position. And I think that's one very strong example, but there are a number that I would say we've learned from going into a corporate pitch or a meeting with a major donor or a trust and foundations opportunity, not really understanding what they're looking for, because sometimes they might give you some criteria, or they might tell you, we're looking for this kind of project, or we want to have that kind of relationship. And actually, when you dig deeper, it's something else altogether. And you only find those things by having genuine relationship. And I think that's probably been one of the biggest shifts we've made in our approach across all of our high value work, is really spending the time to understand what they're looking for, what matters to them, what's in it for them, who are the decision makers. And we've seen real success in getting over the line because we've got insight or understanding from them directly. And I think that has probably been one of the biggest shifts in that firm foundation piece, is you are investing time early on in building a relationship, not just when you know that Charity of the Year opportunities come live, not just when we've got a project we need to raise money for, but you're building relationships with supporters all the time and getting to know them and being curious. And I think probably that takes discipline to spend time on that when you may not be directly working up to an ask, but it ultimately pays off over time.
So an understanding of this principle of firm foundations, it's firm foundations in the sense of building great relationships, which enable you to then request donations to make the world a better place. Whereas some organizations default too quickly to building the quote house and asking for money. That house falls down because the foundations are not there. And firm foundations are any of the things that you and your team can do that make great two-way relationships in the first place. Is that an understanding of that pillar?
Definitely. I think it's some of the practical things. Is everybody putting information on the database? That was one of our challenges. It's not a job that anyone wants to do, but when you have someone who leaves or there's a changeover, we were really losing a lot of that continuity. So some of it is the really, in inverted commas, boring stuff, but they are the foundations on which great relationship management happens. Because when you're the new fundraiser who takes over and you go and have a meeting and you don't know any of the history because nothing was on the CRM, your job is a lot harder to build trust and a great relationship with someone who thinks, I've told you all this before, why are you asking me this? So some of it is the practical stuff. Some of it is, the win or lose, learn, capturing those learnings from a pitch or from an event and our discipline is that every time we have a new event or a plan or a pitch, we go back and we read the document from the wash up. So there's a discipline around doing the wash up and then making sure you go back to it every single time we go out again. We read what happened last time to remind ourselves. And then some of it is this real focus on relationships. So nobody wants to feel like an ATM. Nobody wants to feel like you're coming to them just because you're ready for the next ask. They want to feel seen and heard and valued. And one of our other pillars is exceptional experiences. Well, you can't create that if you don't understand and know who that supporter is or what matters to them. So I would definitely say that's been one of our foundations, is relationship first.
Thank you, Charlotte. So I'm getting a picture that there's actually a range of things that you will strive to do to build those strong platforms. And probably some of them are more obvious and easier than others. Some of them, I think for many charities, we still just struggle. We try to get everyone filling in sensible details on their databases and it changes for a week and then it never sticks. What have you learned, or what do you do that has increased the chances that sensible record keeping on the CRM happens?
It's a great question. I think there's two things that we focused on. One, we've tried to think about what would motivate someone to do it. And we've talked about what it feels like when you're a customer, a business just doesn't have your information, has lost the last conversation you had with them. You've spent ages going through an insurance claim and then you ring them up and they don't have any record of it. I mean, it is the most infuriating thing as a customer. So trying to put yourself in the shoes of somebody that's like, I would be really irritated if they didn't have continuity of this information, or I was having to start from scratch. And we talk about that for people with dementia and what a nightmare it is navigating the NHS and social care system when they have to start and tell their story from scratch every time. So I've tried to get us all to think about ourselves in the kind of the shoes of our donors and how important it is to have information that kind of is consistent. But then the other side of it is we've used a bit of stick, which is we're doing spot checks. So every 6 months, our prospect development team choose some records at random and they go into the database and they check what the information is and how recently it was updated. So hopefully that is a bit of a motivation as well. But we'll see. It's early days, Rob, so we'll have to see how that plays out.
This really makes sense to me. And it is true that what gets measured gets done, and what gets measured, you find time to do. If we were to move on to the second area that you will strive to do well,
exceptional experiences,
to do with exceptional experiences, could you give us a sense of what you mean by that and some of the things you do to encourage that to happen?
This is really important to all of us, I think, because we're very aware that we're competing in a discretionary spending environment for our supporters and our donors. So whether that's an individual who's, giving away money that they could spend on themselves or leave to their children, or a business that's got 1,000 applications for one charity of the year, you are competing. And so we want to make sure that we are giving them the right experience, that they feel like it was the right choice, essentially, and they get some reward out of it. I think they're looking for joy and fulfillment when you give to an organization, whether that's leaving as a legacy or choosing as their partner or giving as a major gift. They want to feel like that has been the right choice and that they get a great sense of fulfillment out of it. So I think we take that really seriously. We also take seriously the fact that they're giving you money to do something. I'm sure they all love the organisation Alzheimer Society. I think we do amazing work, but they're investing in us to make a change in the world that they want to see. So they could choose to do that a different way. So we need to show that we are trustworthy, that we're going to do what we say we're going to do. And so some of exceptional experiences, unfortunately, these days is just doing what you say you will. I think living up to their kind of almost the hygiene factors, but doing those things consistently and then really wowing them. So we have a few things that guide us. And there are 3 things I think really matter for me when it comes to supporter experience. One is that every single interaction with your donor matters. So that thinks about every phone call, every meeting, every event they turn up to. I think it's really trying to get into the detail and every single interaction. And that might be, of course, from another department. So it's how you make sure the whole organization thinks about supporters, which is a piece of work we're doing. But thinking about every single interaction, every letter, every email matters. It's an interaction with you as an organization and how does that make them feel? One of my favorite ever moments as a fundraiser was having a meeting with our Insurance United Against Dementia board chair. Went to his office. He was the CEO of part of the business, very, very busy man. and we were thanking him for his time. And he said, stop there. These meetings are the best part of my day. And I will never forget that, because that's what it should feel like. I mean, we were competing with probably finance and Brexit meetings at the time, so it was probably a low bar. But he was like, this is the best part of my day. I love this. And that's what what it should always feel like when you're involved with an organization doing great work. So that's the first thing. I think the second thing is showing impact every opportunity you get. I think when you work in an organization that's doing great work, you can always forget how important it is to keep telling that story, unless it's like a report or a presentation. And actually those stories that you can tell about, I was speaking to a dementia advisor yesterday, and this is what she's hearing on the phone. And, someone said to her, this helpline is literally the last line of defense for me and my family. And just sharing those stories, reminding people we are doing great work. You are making great work, important work possible, is really an important thing to have in the front of your mind. Every interaction you have, show impact every chance you get. And then the last thing, which I know you and Ben talk about a lot, is just surprise and delight. Try and wow them, because people really need those moments of excitement or just an incredible experience. And that can be big stuff. We had an incredible event last week, thanks to one of our other board chairs. We had an event at the top of the BT Tower. I mean, that was a real wow experience. Lots of people saying, what, just the most amazing evening. But it can also be something that our Legacies team do. They send out a box of fairy lights to solicitors ahead of coming to a Dementia Friends session. And it's like a little teaser to say, come and find out what fairy lights have got to do with dementia. And they love it. And it's because a way of describing what's happening in your brain is that it's like a set of fairy lights, and the lights are going off at different times and dying out. And that's why it's not linear when you progress through dementia. So there's a really good substance to it, but it's a great teaser, and it's like a surprising, really fun way to encourage people to come along. There's also a really strong business reason for us, because we found that it really drives down people not turning up. So we get a lot more people attending once they've received this really small box of fairy lights. So just thinking of creative things like that is really important to make us stand out, basically.
So one thing that I get sometimes when I'm teaching our Wow Your Donors approach is some fundraisers can rightly ask the question, could this be seen as a gimmick? One can picture the kinds of feedback
Absolutely.
One occasionally gets. Should your charity be wasting its money on X, Y, or Z? And to me, I often answer by saying, does it pass the gimmick test? There are some ideas which do stand out. They are different from what your recipient expected. So there's a level of wow there. But then when they find out why you did it, it doesn't quite hang together as to why. So you got their attention, but I don't quite get it. That to me is a gimmick. And we should have, quote, left that idea on the flip chart. To me, you solve the gimmick test by asking, after they go, or after you explain to them why you did what you did, will it make sense? Does it hold true? And in this case, I get it already with hardly any explanation. But both my parents, my dad had dementia, my mum has dementia right now. No one has ever used that analogy of some of those elements of her brain starting to fizzle out like a
and go out, yeah,
like a fairy lights. And yet it's immediately I get it. So I guess my second point is for all our listeners to be on the lookout for the relatively few analogies or metaphors which are so effective, 1,000 times more effective than if you tried to explain something in prose. Search out for those and make use of them. And then even use them in your proposals, use them in your meetings, in your pitches, and then even go the next level and explore, could we actually go the next level and create some kind of wow moment, prop or demonstration using it? Sometimes it's possible, sometimes it's not. And the third reason I like it is you're making this really smart idea work at scale. Again, I love it when fundraisers do something wonderful, bespoke for their supporter, but in a way even better is when you can find a good idea that is replicable. So I'm sensing from that one, a reason the solicitors don't see it as a gimmick is that once they get to the event, part of the story or the presentation is that your colleagues explain why.
Exactly. So when they're there, we talk about what's happening in the brain, what is dementia, what it isn't. And it's one of the ways in which we help to break down the misconceptions of dementia. And fairy lights is a great analogy. So exactly to your point, it's relevant. It's not this sort of random, we've sent you this gift, come along. It's come and find out why fairy lights what fairy lights have got to do with dementia. And so we sort of piqued their interest, but it's got substance to it. And then when they put those fairy lights up at home or in their office, it's a reminder.
Hi, it's Rob, and I couldn't resist adding in one extra detail which inspired me, which is that since we recorded this, Charlotte let me know she'd found out from her colleague who manages these events that since they started out sending fairy lights with the invitations, the no-show rate at these events has dropped from 40% to just 2%. Said differently, it used to be that 4 people out of every 10 who were intending to come didn't make it, presumably because nowadays everybody is just incredibly busy. And now, because of this intriguing wow moment that Charlotte's colleagues have carefully created, almost everyone shows up. When you hear this kind of improvement in the attendance data, it's not hard to see why Charlotte's colleagues put so much effort into creating exceptional experiences for their supporters. Hi, it's Rob. Now, one of my favourite things to do is when I get to hear from charities that have done in-house training with Brightspot and are now getting wonderful results for their charities. And one truly exciting partnership that's launched recently is between Bowel Cancer UK and Andrex, which is a 3-year partnership worth £2.3 million to the charity. Recently, my colleague Ben talked to the brilliant Megan Marsden, who is Senior Strategic Partnerships Manager at Bowel Cancer UK. She shared the difference that this Brightspot training has made for her and her team this year.
Doing it has genuinely completely transformed the way that we work as a team. It's transformed our thinking, it's transformed our results. One team member said that since she has submitted applications using the magic formula, she has been successful in achieving donations from all but one of those partners, which is amazing. It's also led to an uplift as well with the confidence to ask for more. One team member specifically, we have a partner that has supported us for a number of years. She, as a result of working with Ben, thought she could ask for more. She did, and we've had the biggest donation to date. And I would say to anyone thinking about spending money on the Brightspot programme, do it. You will not regret it.
If you're curious about exploring the idea of a bespoke team training session for your charity, for instance, our flagship course, Influencing Donors and Supporters, or our next level training packages in corporate partnerships, go to brightspotfundraising.co.uk/services.
So Charlotte, the other pillar from my memory was the idea of maximising value. Could you tell us a bit about what you mean by that?
So I think we are called to be good stewards of our supporters' money. And so when we are putting on an event, for example, we should be thinking, what's the maximum value we can get from this event? Could it work for more than one donor group? If we're thinking about producing a film or some collateral, you have to be careful that it doesn't become something and nothing because it's gone too broad, and that is definitely a risk. But I think we should always be thinking, how can we really get maximum value from this piece of activity? I also think that, it's really hard, especially as charities grow, it's really hard not to become siloed. But those individuals that we're talking to, those donors, are not in silos themselves. They are complex beings thinking holistically about how they spend their time and their money. So they might be a volunteer for you. They also might be someone who did the marathon, and they might be a major donor. But we think of those as 3 different departments when they're one person. So I think trying to really think across those different departments about the donor. So we've tried to do a lot more work. For example, I think where we've seen the most success, and it is, again, early days, but we had an example where a major donor had been giving significant gifts for a while, but then said they were retiring, and this would sort of be the end of their giving. And the fundraiser, the major gift fundraiser, could have said, "Oh, okay, thanks," and take you off my database or off my list. But they thought, actually, I wonder whether this person would be interested in leaving as a gift in their will. They clearly have had decent wealth. They've been a massive supporter. That their passion for our work wasn't ending. It was just their sort of liquid wealth. So they had a fairly brave conversation. If you're not used to talking about legacies, it can be a bit daunting. We'd done some training with the teams. A benefit of having legacies and high value in the same department meant that we'd been talking about this a bit more between our fundraisers. They had an initial conversation, brought in the legacy giving officer who really helped them with that. And this donor has made a pledge, which is absolutely amazing. And I think we've really celebrated that because it's an example of that fundraiser not just thinking, what's in it for me? I'm not going to get this money on my life. deadline, so I'm not going to spend time on it. They really thought about the donor. The donor loves this organization. How else could they feel part of our future? And like that doesn't stop because they've stopped giving. But also what's a great outcome for the organization. And brilliantly, we've seen that on the other side. So having had that great success, our legacy giving team have been more confident to talk to pledgers about in lifetime giving. And so they've also had that kind of value exchange where they've said, hey, I want to talk to this donor about, I think she'd like to give something now. She's just made this amazing pledge in her will, but she'd also possibly be interested in giving now. We've seen great success. They've made a six-figure donation. So we're really trying to break down those silos and cross-pollinate and get people thinking, well, it takes a lot of time, effort and money to bring in supporters. We need to think as holistically as possible and maximize the value to us as an organization, but also to that donor. How else could they be involved? We've also applied it, I would say, in things like when you have a corporate partnership, where else could they add value? Pro bono, I think, is quite hard to do well, but we've had some really good examples where we've said, well, what's your expertise and where do we have a kind of pain point as an organization, and can we maximize the potential of our partnership while we have it? And we've also thought about, while we're with a partner, how can we engage as many people as possible in that business through our Dementia Friends program or by talking to them about other products. So while we've got them, what's the most we can do with them? But it's also about thinking that we need to break down the silos and think, what's the maximum possibility we could have every time we're talking to a donor. It might not be giving a gift. It might be that you connect them with another team and they go and do something great over there. It might be that they become a mentor for somebody. They might not be ready to give, but you think they'd be really fantastic at supporting our early career researchers. So you connect them with the research team. We're really trying to think about value, not just in cash terms, but value to the organization and back to the donor.
Yeah, I love this. And one of the things you mentioned there was training you've done to do with gifts in wills, and that is part of how this success story happened. I guess there are limits to the number of courses we can put people on in time, as obviously, as well as budget. But I have picked up that, and you've said to me before, we are really passionate about learning and development in all its forms. And I think a fundamental, like there's many things needed to create this genuine donor-focused, holistic way of working. But one of them is a level of knowledge of what the other teams are doing and some fundamentals of, if you're in this team, what those other three teams, the essence of what that means of giving is. I wonder if you could share any of the other habits or tactics you strive to do to upskill everybody and at the very least have them aware of what other people are up to?
Yes. So every 2 months we have a sort of all department online meeting, and we always try and have a bit of a show and tell on that. So some part of one of the teams is talking about some of their work, demonstrating, maybe a project that they're doing or an aspect of their work, just so you get that kind of just visibility and awareness, and it might pique in someone's mind an opportunity for them to collaborate. I think it's just visibility is half the battle, especially now we're all working remotely. I think we also have a real culture of continuous improvement. So really trying to think about how do we all get better. And there's a culture of, I think we've talked about this before, Rob, as well, but giving people permission to spend time learning. Now, that might be, as you say, on a course. It might be listening to your amazing podcast. It might be talking to a colleague, doing, spending time in we call them surgeries or clinics. Sometimes people have them where you take donors that you're stuck on and you're like, I can't think of a way out of this. Giving people permission, that's all part of making you great at your job. It's not a nice to have. It's critical time that you're spending on developing your skills and learning and being inspired by other things. So if someone wants to spend an hour of their day going for a walk and listening to a podcast, brilliant, because that's when you're going to come back with an idea or a breakthrough about something. So I think we try to build a culture of what's everyone else doing, being really curious, asking questions. We're really trying to drive, at the moment, internal networking, because I was lucky to come up through work where you're all in the office and you meet lots of people. And it's much, much harder if you're in a remote, if you're working from home, or you don't get to see your colleagues, or you maybe don't have even a big team. So how do you learn from others, and trying to encourage that cross-pollination of ideas, but in a culture of learning.
I love this. maybe our listeners can imagine, but top line for quite a large, complex organization that you are, and many people are working from home, I guess, quite often. Top line, how do you encourage that mixing or networking to happen?
So on this bi-monthly meeting we have about 15 minutes at the beginning where people just get thrown into breakout rooms with a random selection, which probably puts the fear of God into some people. But we sometimes give them a question to talk through so they're not awkwardly trying to make conversation. But we also have an in-person away day twice a year, which I think is also really important. We do try and mix people up for projects. So it is an element of forced engagement. But once people sort of get to know each other, you find it happens then organically. And I think we also try to talk about, this is the point, it's not a nice to have. This is going to make your job easier. This is going to add value in your day-to-day. The more people you know, the more people you have to ask for help or to help contribute to something you're doing. Your internal network is really important, almost as much as your external network. And they're the people you're going to brainstorm a problem with. So there's that kind of informal learning, if you like, and then we have a more formal learning approach. But I think that those two things need to go together.
So Charlotte, one thing that occurs to me is to make all of this work, one needs to embody an expectation of doing things well, of quote, high standards, or I guess one could call it a high performance culture. Am I right about that? What do you feel about that?
I think that's absolutely critical. One of the stories that I absolutely love and which I talk about a lot is when Toto Wolff joined Mercedes as the principal, and he went into reception, and there on the coffee table were old coffee cup stains, and there was old magazines all curled up at the corners. And he thought, hold on a second, this is not the impression of Mercedes. We are a highly technical, exceptional racing company, and this is not the impression. If I was a driver getting into a car that was going to be driving at 200 miles an hour, I wouldn't want to think that this was our attention to detail. So it's always stayed with me, and he went in and he built a whole culture around absolutely every touch point needs to be on point. And that, I think, is really important. I completely disagree with the statement, don't sweat the small stuff. I think it's in the small stuff that you build the great things, because it's about every interaction with the donor. It's about caring about every email. It's about asking the right questions when you have the chance, because it will lead to something that helps you build the right proposal later on. So yes, we have really, really high standards. We're also human, and I think we're very compassionate organization that understands sometimes you're going to make mistakes. Sometimes you're going to take a big risk and it's not going to pay off. Sometimes you're going to get something wrong. But if your kind of focus is on having high standards and maintaining them and putting the work in and caring, radically caring about the quality of your work, then we're going to get to the right place more often than not. And I think that's really important, that you are consistent as a leadership team as well. You absolutely have to walk the talk as a leadership team. And that's really important for me and the heads of the High Value and Legacies team, that we demonstrate that in our interactions. And it has led to some tough conversations. You know, there might be a proposal that everyone's like, it's good enough. And I've said, it's not good enough. It's not going out. So we've had some tougher moments on this kind of ambition to have high standards. But as long as you all learn from it and you understand why and how you can improve, then the next time you're closer.
Wonderful stuff, Charlotte. And a thread that I've picked up all through this conversation is how highly you value learning, and that it is all a journey. And just seeing that, I think, frees us from the scariness of, quote, perfectionism, because you're not seeking perfection, you're seeking to do things as well as you can today. And actually, that's far more liberating than insisting that everything needs to be perfect.
Yeah, I see fundraising and I see, communications. It's a craft, and we're all honing our craft. And I'm a much better communicator and fundraiser than I was 2 years ago, 5 years ago, because I'm learning all the time. And hopefully in a few years' time, I'll look back and think, gosh, I'm even better at different aspects of it. So I think if you approach it as we're craftspeople, and each experience is building our skills and abilities to do even better, I think that takes away the fear of failure, which is not helpful.
Yeah, I quite agree. Charlotte, thank you so much for sharing, first of all, this really helpful framework, and also all these examples and ideas to bring to life what you mean by it. I really hope it's going to help our listeners as well. I've certainly learned a lot. So I look forward to catching up with you soon. But for now, thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thanks so much, Rob. I've really enjoyed it.
There you go. I hope you found our chat helpful. As we always do, we'll put a summary in the episode notes on the podcast section of our Bright Spot website. If you've not already subscribed to our show, do click that button now. Straight away you'll get access through your phone to dozens more examples and tips to help you with your fundraising. I am super excited about the inspiring new Bright Spot stories I've been recording and I'm going to be sharing in the next few weeks. So please don't miss out on the chance to receive those straight to your phone when we release them. And if you find this podcast, my books, my webinars, or our Breakfast Club helpful, just think how much more difference it would make if we could go into any of these techniques at a deeper level and with the rest of your team. One of our favourite things to do is to create a bespoke training day or package to help your whole team learn powerful techniques and grow fundraising results. For instance, I'm hugely proud of how effective our Influencing Donors and Supporters training is for any fundraising team. To find out more or to request a chat, go to brightspotfundraising.co.uk/services. Thank you as always for supporting our show, just by listening or indeed by sharing it with your friends, your team or on LinkedIn. This generous sharing and feedback gives me such a lift when I'm trying to somehow carve out time to create the new episodes. Thank you as always for the part you play in this show. Do let us know what you think. Charlotte Mathieu and I are both easy to find on LinkedIn. Good luck today with your efforts as a fundraiser or a leader, and I can't wait to share another Bright Spot story with you very soon.